I didn't plan to fall apart in a circle of folding chairs and stale coffee, but grief has a habit of breaking schedules. The community room smelled like dust and winter coats, and the clock on the wall clicked like a slow leak. I'd come because the silence in my apartment had grown teeth, because the mirror kept returning a stranger's face to me. The group leader was saying something about naming what's heavy, and all I could think was how heavy can't be spoken, only carried. That was when my breath snagged. It caught on some invisible nail in my chest and wouldn't move forward or back. Sweat prickled, my tongue turned to salt, faces blurred, then sharpened, then warped again like I was looking through water. A noise left my throat, too small to be a cry, too big to swallow. I wanted to vanish. I wanted a door, and then I felt it, a hand sliding gently into mine, not startling, not demanding, just there, quiet and sure, the way a shoreline just is for a tired wave. Warmth climbed from our joined palms to my wrist, then to the bones that had been rattling inside me all week. Breathe with me, a voice said, low as thunder in the distance. 1, 2, I followed. My lungs, stubborn as locked windows, gave a little. 1, 2, the room softened, the clock softened, my own chest softened. When I finally looked up, he was already looking back, eyes the color of early morning, somewhere between gray and promise. He didn't smile. He didn't perform tenderness. He just held my gaze like a lantern holds flame, protecting it from wind. The leader's voice carried on. Someone else shared. The world resumed. Our hands stayed linked beneath the lip of our chairs, hidden yet undeniable, like a secret that knew it wasn't a sin, only a sanctuary. After the session, people shuffled coats and offered flat cookies and braver faces. I stayed seated, afraid that if I stood, the panic would take the cue and return. He didn't rush. He waited until the room emptied to a hush. Then he released my hand with a care that felt almost ceremonial, as if returning something precious I hadn't realized I'd loaned him. Water, he asked. I nodded. Sips, air through a straw, my body slowly becoming a place I could inhabit again. I'm River, he said, finally. The name fit, because that's what his presence had been. Movement that didn't require me to force it. I'm my own name snagged, as if even that needed permission. I'm here, I managed, and we both laughed at the ridiculous truth of it. The rules were taped on the wall. No dating within the group. Boundaries are care. But the memory of his touch had already threaded itself through my pulse, anchoring me to a shore I hadn't known, I'd been searching for. Forbidden, yes, but some things are forbidden because they're dangerous, and others because they're powerful. I couldn't tell which this was, only that my bones had stopped rattling when he held my hand. Outside, the night was a bruise dissolving into indigo. He walked me to the door, not too close, not too far. You're safe, he said, not as a promise he couldn't keep, but as a reminder of a truth I could step into. I believed him, or maybe I just wanted to. Either way, I could breathe again, and that felt like the beginning of everything. The week after that first meeting, rules tried to move in like stern relatives. The poster in the hallway spelled everything out in polite, heavy letters. No entanglements inside the circle. Keep the edges clean. Remember why you came. I read it twice, the way someone reads a weather report and then still walks out without an umbrella, pretending the sky won't do what skies do. I told myself I was strong, responsible, disciplined. I said the word boundaries, aloud like it could build itself into a fence around my heartbeat. Then the door opened and River stepped through, and the fence forgot its job. He didn't sit beside me that evening. He chose the chair across the ring, a respectful distance that felt like a desert to cross. Our eyes found each other anyway, like magnets pretending to be coins. The leader talked about coping tools and tolerating uncertainty. I practiced both by counting the breaths between River's glances, tracing calm into my thigh with a fingertip, promising not to invent meanings. Still, meanings invented themselves. Every time his mouth braided itself into that quiet, almost smile, some patient animal inside me stood up and listened. During break, the room grew noisy with lukewarm coffee and the shuffle of paper cups. I drifted toward the water cooler. He approached from the other side, the way tide meets shore without announcing intention. We didn't touch, we didn't need to. Attention itself had texture, electric, careful, certain. "How's your breath?" he asked, and it was such a simple question that it felt like mercy. "Most days it stays." I said, "Today, it's practicing escape." A flush rose up my neck because honesty often does that, but he received it gently, as if holding a bird he meant to release intact. The group resumed. We sat. Words were shared and folded away. I kept forgetting the shape of the room, remembering only the current running between us. Unseen, unapproved, undeniable. When the session ended, I lingered to stack chairs, a small devotion to order. River stayed too. We talked about ordinary things the way people do when the extraordinary is standing between them like a candle they're both shielding from wind. Music that helps at 3 a.m. The miracle of finding a grocery store clerk who remembers a name. The relief of rain when the city smells like metal. None of it was a confession, yet everything was. Outside, winter had thinned into a hesitant spring. Streetlights threw halos on the wet pavement. He walked beside me, both of us careful with space, as if the night itself were a witness. At the corner, he stopped. "We should keep the boundary," he said, and I admired the way his voice made room for truth without making it sound like punishment. "I know," I answered, and the word tasted like good medicine, bitter, necessary, proof of care. But the body is a historian. It remembers steadiness, anchors, the way a palm can teach a heartbeat to choose life again. When a bus roared past and a gust of wind shoved cold air into my coat, I swayed, just a little. He didn't reach for me, he only looked, and the look said, "I felt that too." Desire isn't always ablaze. Sometimes it's the warmth you notice only after stepping in from snow, the soft insistence that says, "Stay." We traded numbers under the pretense of safety. "In case another panic hits," he said, "in case the roof caves." I joked, and neither of us laughed. The phone felt heavier in my palm, as if choice had gained weight. That night, a message arrived. "Breathe easy. You're safe. Nothing else. No hooks, no tugging." I stared at the words until sleep found me like a tide, finally deciding on shore. Days turned into a quiet choreography. We kept our conversations matter of fact, sentences wrapped in cotton, books, coffee, sunlight on windowsills, the way grief hums lower some mornings. Yet between those careful stitches, something fierce threaded itself through. Not scandal, not rebellion, a vow growing roots even before language, to shepherd each other back to steadiness, to be a hand when the room tilted, to choose tenderness in a world that kept offering hardness as proof of strength. We were off limits, yes, but my pulse didn't speak policy. It spoke recognition. The boundary stayed, and still, I learned this. Some distances protect what's forming. The space between us wasn't a wall that kept love out. It was a greenhouse where patience warmed the air, and every glance was water, and every careful step was light. If rules are railings meant to keep a soul from falling, then maybe we were learning how to hold them while still walking toward the part of the path that felt like home. The first time we really talked, it wasn't planned. It happened in the half-hour after group when most people had left, and the echo of chairs scraping against the floor had already faded into silence. I was folding my coat over my arm, pretending not to linger. He was stacking cups with a kind of unnecessary precision, as if delaying time was a craft. We both knew we were waiting, not for each other exactly, but for the permission to let something unspoken breathe. He broke the quiet first. "What keeps you awake?" he asked, the kind of question that didn't belong to small talk. The air shifted. A door cracked open inside me, the one I usually kept bolted. My instinct was to retreat, to varnish my truth with jokes or polite brushstrokes. But his voice was steady, a kind of invitation I hadn't heard in a long time, so I told him, not everything, just the pieces that still tasted of smoke, the loss that left me hollow, the nights I drowned in my own thoughts, the way silence sometimes felt like claws on glass. My words shook. They always did when they mattered. He didn't look away. He didn't hand me solutions wrapped in clichés. He just stood there, present, as though the weight I carried had a right to be spoken aloud. When I trailed off, ashamed of how raw the confession sounded in the open air, he nodded once. "I know that kind of night," he said softly, and then he told me his, the fracture that never quite healed. The guilt that woke him at 2 a.m., the loneliness that filled rooms even when people surrounded him. His voice didn't tremble. It broke briefly, then rebuilt itself in front of me. We weren't trading secrets to bind each other in chains. We were exchanging them like fragile glass, each of us careful to handle the other without dropping what was too precious to lose. There was a holiness to it, two cracked souls admitting they were cracked, and somehow the cracks fit. By the time the room was empty but for us, the confessions had stitched themselves into something like hope, not loud, not neon, just a quiet thread pulling me back to life. He smiled then, not the polite kind, but the weary kind that said, "I'm still here, and so are you." It lodged in me like a vow. On the way out, he walked beside me, silence wrapping around us differently now, not empty, but full. At the door, I almost said thank you, but it felt too small, like offering a paper cup for an ocean. Instead, I just said, "I don't usually talk like that." He glanced at me, his eyes soft but unyielding. "You didn't just talk, you trusted. That matters more." That night, lying awake, I replayed every word. I realized it wasn't the confessions themselves that had shaken me. It was the way they were received, with gentleness, with patience, with no rush to fix or diminish. For the first time in years, I felt like maybe I wasn't broken beyond repair. Maybe I was just unfinished, and maybe, with the right hands holding the pieces, I could learn to live whole again. The first time he brushed against the wall I had built, I almost pushed him away. Safety had been my anthem for years. Don't lean too close. Don't let anyone see the fragile wiring. Don't gamble on closeness because closeness always costs. I had convinced myself that walls were strength, that silence was survival. But walls don't hold you when the night shakes. Silence doesn't steady your hands when your pulse is a runaway train. He never tried to knock them down. That's what undid me. He didn't demand entry. He didn't climb or claw. He just lingered near the gate, patient, waiting, like someone who understood that even stone eventually softens under rain. He kept showing up in small ways, sending me a line from a book at dawn, reminding me to drink water on days when I would forget, laughing at my sharp edges as though they were constellations instead of warning signs. Each gesture was so ordinary, but together they became a language that said, "I see you, I'm not leaving." I remember the night surrender began. My apartment was too quiet, every corner humming with ghosts. I texted him without planning to. "Are you awake?" The reply came instantly, always. Minutes later, his knock broke the hush. I opened the door and for a moment just stood there, unsure whether to let him in, unsure if letting him in meant undoing the version of myself I had learned to protect. "Only if you want," he said, and something in me unclenched. I stepped aside. We didn't touch at first. We just sat on the couch, the city's hum leaking through the windows. I talked about nothing, how my lamp flickered, how I hated the way winter stretched time. He listened as if each detail mattered, as if even my complaints carried value. Then, without fanfare, he reached over and placed his hand gently over mine. No urgency, no hunger, just a steady warmth. It was the simplest thing, but my ribs ached from the sudden rush of wanting to believe this could be safe. I told him I was scared, scared of needing anyone, scared of losing again, scared of how much his presence already mattered. He didn't hush me, he didn't argue, he only whispered, "Then let's be scared together." Something broke in me then, not a wound, but a dam. Tears came. He caught them with his fingertips, not wiping them away quickly, but holding them like proof. Proof I was real, proof I was alive, proof that surrender isn't weakness, it's permission. Permission to be seen, permission to lean, permission to let someone hold the weight for just a moment so my own arms could rest. That night, I didn't plan to fall asleep beside him, but I did, not wrapped in some cinematic embrace, but with his arm draped lightly over me, his breathing syncing with mine. And when dawn came, my first thought wasn't panic. It was peace. I woke and realized my body hadn't braced itself all night. It had rested. It had trusted. Surrender didn't happen in one dramatic confession. It happened like that, inch by inch, heartbeat by heartbeat, until I couldn't remember where the walls had stood. I only knew this. Every time he touched me, it didn't feel like risk anymore. It felt like returning. There are nights when the body remembers pain more vividly than memory ever could. My hands would tremble without warning. My chest would lock as though the air had been stolen from the room. Old grief has a way of sneaking back in like an uninvited guest, dragging shadows across every corner no matter how much light you've gathered. It happened one evening after a long day that should have been harmless. Work, errands, noise, nothing unusual. But when I walked back into my apartment, the silence hit like a wave, too deep, too heavy. I sat on the floor, back pressed against the couch, and felt myself unravel. My pulse sprinted, my vision tunneled. My body shook so hard it felt like my bones were begging to escape. I hated it. I hated that no matter how far I'd come, panic could still drag me back. I didn't want him to see me like that. I thought love required a polished version, the strong facade, the unshaken smile. But my hands betrayed me, fumbling with my phone, and before I could stop myself, I had typed, "I can't breathe." His reply came within seconds, "I'm coming." By the time he arrived, my entire body was trembling. I wanted to hide, to disappear, but the moment I saw him at the door, something inside me loosened. He didn't say much. He just walked in, closed the door softly, and sank down to the floor beside me. His arms slipped around my shoulders, pulling me against him, and for the first time all day, I let myself lean, breathe with me. He whispered the same words he'd spoken the first time our hands had found each other in that crowded room. He pressed his forehead lightly to mine, and I felt the rhythm of his lungs guiding me. Slow, steady, patient. He didn't ask me to stop shaking. He didn't try to fix what was breaking inside me. He simply stayed, his presence wrapping around my chaos until the storm inside began to quiet. Minutes passed, maybe hours, I don't know, but the trembling softened. My breath came easier. My body, traitor to my pride, began to rest against him. And when the last of the panic drained out, I realized he was still holding me exactly the same. No hesitation, no shift in warmth. He hadn't flinched from the worst of me. He had anchored me through it. "I'm sorry," I murmured, because that's what I always said after breaking. Sorry for being fragile, sorry for needing, sorry for not being the fortress I thought love demanded. He tightened his arm around me. "Don't apologize for being human. You don't scare me." Those words pierced deeper than any declaration of love could have, because declarations are easy. They shine bright in the good moments. But this, his steadiness in the darkness, his refusal to pull away when I shook, this was love in its truest form. Later, when we moved to the couch, I laid with my head on his chest, listening to the slow thrum of his heart. It struck me that the beat was constant, unbothered, not rushing to match my chaos or dragging me into calm. It just was, steady, enduring. And it dawned on me, that maybe that's what love is supposed to be. Not fireworks that burn out, not passion that rises and fades, but a heartbeat that stays steady even when everything else shakes. That night, as sleep pulled me under, I realized something profound. He wasn't just someone I loved. He was the lifeline that reminded me I could survive, that I was worth surviving for. Forever didn't arrive in the form of an altar or rings or a crowd gathered to clap. It came quietly in the folds of our ordinary days, the kind no one photographs but the kind that built us brick by brick. It was in the mornings when I stumbled into the kitchen with messy hair and tired eyes, and he would already have the kettle humming, 2 mugs waiting side by side. "You take the first sip," he'd always say, like the small ritual was sacred. The steam curled between us like a whispered promise. "I'm here, and I'll be here again tomorrow." It was in the afternoons we spent walking through the park, talking about nothing, books, old memories, the kind of future we weren't yet brave enough to plan out loud. He would reach for my hand without looking, and every time our fingers wove together, I felt the vow sealed again, simple and wordless. A vow not to abandon, not to vanish, not to loosen when the storm pressed hard. One evening, rain pounded against the windows as thunder growled. I hated storms. The sudden cracks in the sky always rattled me. I must have flinched because he came over, set down the book he'd been reading, and wrapped his arms around me without a single word. The thunder roared again, but this time I didn't break apart. His touch steadied me the way it always had, his breath slow and certain against my hair. And in that moment I understood, love doesn't have to be loud to be eternal. It can be as soft as arms that know exactly when to pull you close. We never declared vows in public, but I remember one night, lying tangled in sheets, when I asked him, half, whisper half, "Dream, do you think this lasts?" His eyes, heavy with sleep but full of truth, met mine. "It lasts as long as we keep choosing it, and I'll keep choosing it every day." Those words weren't dramatic, weren't dressed in poetry, yet they sank deeper than any rehearsed vow could have, because that's what real forever is, isn't it? Not a single grand gesture, but 1,000 small choices made again and again, to stay, to hold, to show up. Years may pass, storms may come, but I know this. Every time his hand finds mine, it won't just be skin on skin. It will be the same vow it was the very first time in that crowded room. A vow that says, you're not alone, you never will be again. And maybe that's what makes our story true love. Not perfection, not endless ease, but the simple, steady decision to be each other's lifeline. Always. If you've walked this journey with me, if you felt even a spark of what it means to be held steady by love, don't let it go. Cherish it, nurture it, and keep choosing it every day. If my story touched your heart, I ask you to like this video, share it with someone who believes in love, and subscribe to join me for more. Together, let's keep telling the stories that remind us what real love feels like, raw, imperfect, and forever true.